Weeks, and this is Bounce. On this podcast, we talk with people from a variety of fields about dealing with challenges and adversity and how they bounce back or push through. To that end, this will be an interview format. In each episode, we're going to have conversations about setback, whether it's career or business. It could be physical or psychological pain. We're going to try to parse out how our guests dealt with it or deal with it, as the case may be, and how we can learn from it. Welcome to Bounce.
Being born the way that I was, while there was many times as a kid where I'd wish and dream and pray that they would wake up and have arms and legs, now I view it as my greatest strength. Transitional moments in our lives, I think, as human beings, we sort of struggle with. And when you have a physical disability, I think it just exacerbates that much more. I think it was entirely belief. I look back on that and it really had very little to do with the physicality of it. It was more of the mindset of it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of the Bounce podcast. In this particular episode, I'm pretty stoked about. I think it's perfect as our first, as it covers one of the most extreme examples of dealing with challenges and overcoming them. My guest is Kyle Maynard. Most of you probably already know who he is, as his story's been on countless television programs and a variety of documentaries. And it's been viewed by millions around the world. Just Google his name and you'll see what I'm talking about. I think I first saw him on an HBO Sports episode, but he's also been on 2020 and many others. So for those of you who don't know who he is, he's an entrepreneur, speaker. Kyle's a best-selling author of the book No Excuses, and he was the focus of a moving ESPN documentary I highly recommend called A Fighting Chance. And he's an award-winning extreme athlete. He was on the University of Georgia wrestling team. He was an ESPY award winner twice, I believe, 2004 and 2012. But I could be wrong. Double check. He was the first man, get this, to bear crawl to the top of the highest mountain in Africa, Mount Kilimanjaro. It's over 19,000 feet. He did the same at the summit of Argentina's Mount Aconcagua. I may not be saying that right, which is almost 23,000 feet, but it's the highest peak in both the Western and Southern hemispheres. So that's right. I said bear crawl. So I think most of you know what that is. Getting down on all fours. Consider it a traveling plank. You're holding yourself up on all fours all the way up a mountain. I mean, just think about trying to do that around your block. And you may get a sense of the monumental feat that is. But Oprah Winfrey called Kyle one of the most inspiring young men you will ever hear about. Arnold Schwarzenegger described him as the real deal, a champion human, one of the most inspiring people he's ever met. Kyle's also a CrossFit certified instructor, gym owner. This blows my mind. And Kyle constantly blows my mind, but he was a competitive MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighter. So we'll talk more of that. World record-setting weightlifter, skilled mountaineer. So all of these accomplishments by themselves are rare, right? But they are not the amazing thing about Kyle. So for those of you who don't know Kyle, will not know he did this as a quadruple amputee and without the aid of prosthetics. So Kyle was born with a rare condition known as congenital amputation, but I'm going to let Kyle tell you more. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for that, man. And now I'm here with Larry hanging out, so it's perfect.
Listen,
I got to add that to the list.
Tell us about your condition, because I don't know medical background on it or context.
Sure. So basically, for those that are not watching the video broadcast of this, just listening, my arms end right at where the elbows would be and my legs end right at where the knee would be. And I have feet, but they're not a typical foot, but so I do have feet. So basically when I'm at home, or even just traveling or wherever I'm at, then I only use a wheelchair to get around longer distances. And then I just jump out of my chair and kind of do it on my own. But that's, really just the mindset my family raised me with growing up was really not to look at myself as too dissimilar from anybody else. And just kind of, their goal was just a normal life for me. Wow.
It's amazing. I think we were talking about this earlier. I saw you on HBO Sports. I don't know if you had written the book yet then, but you can type 50 words a minute. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say, in the interest of authenticity, I think video games were my biggest inspiration to learn how to use the computer. So, it was just, I was a hardcore gamer growing up and wanted to learn how to type and all that. So basically my elbows hit the keys, totally unadapted on my MacBook right now. And then just, So you're saying, you can type super fast, but you're saying you played video games and that gave you some type of dexterity or the ability? It's really a big part of it. Yeah. I think there's a lot of things that went into the dexterity of kind of learning how to, use my arms, and was lucky. I had an amazing grandmother who was almost like a, at-home occupational therapist. That she didn't have a background in that, but she just kind of naturally, intuitively knew how to do things to get me to, paint on the walls with water, holding a paintbrush between my arms. And
your grandmother.
Yeah. You just get away with murder at grandma's house, right? The goal was she would let me spill stuff and then I would clean it up. And my parents kind of pulled the ultimate Jedi mind trick, where it was these are not the droids you're looking for. You're not disabled. Okay, cool. I'm not disabled.
Your parents. Yeah. All these physical feats, wrestling and mountain climbing. By the way, Kyle, you own a gym? You're doing CrossFit? What?
Yeah, I've owned a gym now since 2008. So it's now almost, it'll be 9 years old this December.
Wow. And so not only was Kyle wrestle, you did it in high school and college. Is that right?
I did. Yeah. Just a club in college, but started out, the very short story is with that. I just was really, really bad when I started, lost every single match for a year and a half, and ended up, fast forward many years later, people were saying oh, Kyle's unfairly advantaged, and, just beating other able-bodied kids, and, just ended up placing top 12 in the nation in my weight class.
You lost for a year and a half. So first of all, why did you pick wrestling?
My dad was a wrestler, and he kind of tricked me into coming out thinking it was going to be just pro wrestling you see on TV, the Hulk Hogan, all that stuff. And so, but that was a big part of it. And, he said it improved my tackling with football, and I was a football player before that. So it's my first sport, and I would play nose guard, take my helmet and smash it in the guy's shins as hard as I could and try to bring him down. So
you got into wrestling. How many matches is that you would have lost for a year and a half? How many is that?
35. Yeah.
Did you lose by wide margins or?
Yeah, I was getting my butt kicked. It was, I was getting destroyed then initially. And I think a lot of people were wondering why my parents were making me do this. This is crazy. Are they that sadistic where they're making their disabled son, force him to do this? But, I think they had a bigger picture in mind that, what I'd be capable of down the road, even though my dad, if you were being honest with you, he was a wrestler, and he'd probably say that he never thought that I would win a match. Is what I've heard him say before. So, which amazes me that they were able to push me as hard as they did, still not thinking that I would ever, win a match.
Were they the factor in you not quitting? How did you not quit?
At 11 years old, it was in middle school. I hated it. I begged to quit. And the rule is that if you signed up for a sport in a season, you had to finish the season. Oh. My parents would say, if we dished out the money for you to go and do this right now, then you got to finish it out. And so it's okay. So it was the same rule for my sisters too. And I've got 3 younger sisters, and all totally able-bodied, very gifted athletes and students themselves. And now one's a mother, so I get to be an uncle to 2 awesome babies. And
very cool.
But yeah, that was just that their rule was look, if you started something, you got to finish at least a season. So the goal went from, just winning a match, and then realized that wasn't going to happen anytime soon, to not being pinned. And that was my new goal. And even spent a lot of that year. I know you've got the grappling background from our mutual friend, Chris Howder, that we were sharing before we started. But, I spent a lot of that year with one shoulder pressed on the mat, trying to fight to stay alive. And second year, 7th grade signups came, and my dad said, look, he's like, I didn't win a single match my whole first year in wrestling. Very few people do. It's a very tough sport, but everybody wins a match their second season because you'll beat somebody who was there first year. Mm-hmm. He said, that's kind of how it works. And I believed that whole story until I was interviewing my grandpa for my book, and my dad's dad. And I told him that, like, that memory that I had, and he was like, what are you talking about? He's just like, he won a lot of matches his first year. So I based my
Jedi mind tricks. Yeah.
Right. Based my whole life on that lie.
So, and by the way, Kyle is doing, are you very much into jiu-jitsu right now still?
I am, yeah. So I've got a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. I've not trained as hard as I was the last year, but that's only because the 2 years prior to that, it was training pretty much full time. It was 4 to 6 hours a day. Was training to fight in the Jiu-Jitsu World Championship. So
I got a question for Kyle, but just for the audience. So this is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's a grappling sport. Most of it is on the ground, and most everybody's heard of this now. But one of the key positions is called the guard, where you have somebody between your legs, you're on your back, and you're fighting. It's a very good martial art for learning how to fight on your back, and that's one of the key components of jiu-jitsu, I would think, is the guard, because of helio. A smaller person can handle a very much larger person if they're. But Kyle, how do you do a guard? How do you do a guard?
Yeah.
Or do you not?
Even as you're describing guard too, it's kind of like one of those things where, somebody hasn't heard of it. It sounds like a very disadvantageous position to be, right? It's like, I'm going to throw my legs around a guy and lie in my back. And the principles of the guard really are to control, a person's hips, right? So if someone can get their hips past yours and on top of yours and dominate your hips, then it's like effectively they can control you, right? Where the head goes, the body goes. Where the hips go, the body's going to go as well. Mm-hmm. So for me, the way that I do that is a little different. So I play a position called half guard, which is just locking down one leg. And in particular, play a position called deep half guard. And it's really just try to control one leg, with my feet and legs locked around that one leg and that one foot controlled. It's like, try to do the whole kind of boa constrictor thing and just kind of gradually, start on the leg and then work my way up the body.
That's amazing. So what about wrestling? I wasn't a wrestler, but how did you do that? Was it, so your first goal was, okay, I don't want to get pinned, but then you have to pin someone, right? So you must have been elated when you won your first match, and that must have just been. I was pretty
stoked for that. It was a pretty big weight off my
I
shoulders.
can do this. Some belief started building, or you kept getting closer and closer, right?
Absolutely. I think it was entirely belief. I look back on that, and it really had very little to do with the physicality of it. It was more of the, a lot to do with like the mindset of it. When my first match that I won was like, it ended up being I beat my opponent by a technical fall, which is a margin of like such a big margin that they stopped the match by like a mercy rule, basically. So the way that I did that was I would, sort of when I grab a hold of someone or take somebody down, I can lock with my arms, and hold them together, or I could lock even under my armpit in my chest to go and grab a hold of an arm and like barrel roll somebody, sort of gator roll. Also, I'll lock a lot of times like someone's like arm or wrist, like in between my shoulder and my chin. And, if I get a hold of an arm or a wrist or a leg, then now I can go and like, gradually sort of like, that boa constrictor kind of mentality, right? So it can kind of then work my way closer to the core, up the frame. And my strengths were exactly that. So strength, my advantages were the strength. So it was, in high school, I was wrestling at 103 pounds, and I actually had to cut a fair bit of weight to go and make that. My natural weight in high school was around 125, and I was cutting down to 103. So it was already a lot bigger. And then, you couple that with the fact that I didn't have the extra, arm and leg weight. So then at that point, I was much stronger than the opponents I was going up against. At 17 years old, I had, I would do butterfly presses with sort of chains and straps around my arms. And I did 240 pounds 23 times at 17. So there's not going to be many other 103 wrestlers that could bench press 240 pounds, much less maybe a handful, but, to do, 240 pounds 23 times, when I'm wrestling at 103 pounds. Significant strength advantage there.
One of the things I thought of, and I don't want to get off onto a grappling interview here, but it's fascinating for me because, I've grappled. And when I would see your tapes of the jiu-jitsu or the wrestling, I would think to myself, man, I think there'd be an advantage that you would have, at least for the first 5 minutes, because I don't know what to do with you.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't have a leg to grab. I don't have an arm to lock. You know what I mean? Or whatever. But I mean, it's a good lesson in a way that people don't realize the advantages they may have where they think it's a disadvantage. You know what I mean? The yin yang of it, where every asset has a liability, and maybe every liability has some kind of asset, whether we learn from it or, in your case, an opponent. Who is this? What do I do?
Well, as an example, outside of the context of just like grappling, but I think the grappling and jiu-jitsu, as it's sort of, it is an interesting metaphor for life, right?
It is.
So I do a lot of work with, speaking to different groups, and in particular speak for a lot of different financial services groups, right? So say it's like financial advisors or something like that, right? So it's their job is heavily pegged, well, at least somewhat pegged, to the overall performance of the stock market. And if you look at what happened in 2008 when the market crashed, then, a lot of people, myself included, I remember I had my money invested and it was like a group managed portfolio, and I'm trying to get one of the financial advisors on the phone. I didn't really have a personal relationship with them. So the hold times were insane, all of that. Right. So for the financial advisor that's doing this, then they're like Chicken Little, the sky is falling, like the world's never going to be the same. What's going on? I'm losing all my clients, all this stuff. Right. So massive hardship. But I think the smartest financial advisors were the ones that then saw the advantage in that. And they saw, everybody's going through the same thing right now. And a lot of other people's clients are pissed off at the way that their money was handled. So I can go and scoop up those clients. I can build relationships with those clients. And then when the market came back around, they had tripled or quadrupled their business. So the 2008 crash ended up being the best thing that ever happened to their business. And similarly, being born the way that I was, while there was many times as a kid where I'd wish and dream and pray that they would wake up and have arms and legs. If I'd continued to do that my whole life, it would have been nothing but a disappointment. But now I view it as my greatest strength. I mean, it's really the principal reason why you and I are having this conversation in the first place, and why I've gotten to have many other conversations, like it, over the years. And the people then I've been able to gotten to connect with and to reach, and things I've gotten to experience. So much of it I owe to the way that I was born and the lessons that I learned from it. So now I have nothing but gratitude for it. And there's really nothing in the world that you could offer me to make me go back. I mean, it's by far the greatest gift I've ever been given, but we don't always see it that way at the time.
Oh yeah. That's what a great lesson. Do you, and a lot of this is, I'm assuming your parents, right? Or in the way that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they didn't build a lot of things within your living area that would necessarily help you.
Yeah. It was it was a good balance. My mom's instincts were she wanted to help and to coddle, and, that was just to kind of be the motherly,
that's mom, right. Yeah.
Type. Yeah. Mom, and my dad, he was the one that kind of saw the bigger vision of look, he's not going to want to have mom or grandma feeding him all the time and be on a senior prom date and have grandma waiting behind him with a bite of food, here, Kyle, oh, thanks, grandma.
What? You can't have that? That would be awkward on dates, right?
Yeah, I think he just got the bigger vision of it, the fact that like it would be helpful to be as independent as possible. And at an early age, that was, I think, a really critical distinction, because I was very lucky to have them step back and allow me to figure stuff out, to kind of go through the failures. And I think that...
Well, hang on. Forgive me. You just said something. I was very fortunate that they step back and allow me to experience failures. I think a lot of parents need to hear that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and, if you look at the flip side of that, though, of like, I want to jump in and protect my kid every time something bad happens, or, I want to keep them from experiencing hardship. That is a temporary solution to, and it creates a much bigger problem later on. It creates a much bigger dependency or disability down the road. And both are done out of love. I mean, it's only when you're going to have someone that's, in that, complete sort of mindless state of neglect. I mean, really, the helicopter parent is still helicopter parenting out of love, but they don't necessarily realize that by fighting their kids' battles, they're actually doing them a disservice in the long run.
And I'm not saying parents shouldn't intervene by any means. My parents, thank God, intervened for me and supported me and helped me. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's a balance, right? And there could be a tipping point where it's harmful. And I think in your case, an extreme case, well, let me ask you, would it have hurt you had they done more for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty convinced. I mean, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I mean, it's
wow, yeah.
It's, you never know what path like things go and what they take or whatever. But even in the wrestling example, right? We were talking about that. I begged to quit and pleaded and cried, and my dad videotaped every one of these matches, and then we would come home and drill the moves on the living room floor. And a lot of times I would, I didn't want to do it. I'd almost be in tears, right? So he pushed me pretty hard. And but I'm super grateful for the fact that was the case, though. Now, I mean, it's without that, then I would have quit on my own, because at 11 years old, when the frontal lobe of the male brain's not developed until the mid to late 20s, right, which is going to go and project out into the future, and see the long-term effect of something. At 11 years old, I would have done anything to sort of absolve the pain there. Mm-hmm. So, now it's now I can look back and say, like, absolutely, beyond the shadow of a doubt, them pushing me in that moment was really what I needed. However, it's just really hard to do that in that moment. I don't have any kids of my own yet, at least not that I know of, but I've got a baby niece and a nephew, and I look at them and I'm like, it's really hard to watch them struggle with stuff.
And that reminds me, though, that makes me think how hard it must have been for your parents to think, they have a plan for you, maybe thinking this is the right thing. They've probably talked about it. And then to see you struggle, must have been very, very difficult for them not to say, screw this. You know what? Yep. Pick him up. Let's, you know what I'm saying? Wow. Yep. Yeah.
Well, a lot of your show is about dealing with bouncing back from, it's like a hardship, right? Yeah. Bounce back from sort of a tragedy or massive struggle. And even the moment that I was born came as a fairly big surprise, right? So they didn't have any idea I'd be born with a disability. The ultrasound technology I just turned 31. It was a lot different 31 years ago. My best friend, Joey, who I know you've talked to and kind of setting and recording this up, his wife is pregnant now, and he was sending me some ultrasound pictures, and I could see even like at 6 or 7 weeks like the limb development at the time. So my mom and dad had no idea, and I think it was a really special moment. My grandmother jumped, my grandma and grandpa jumped in the car, drove from Fort Wayne, Indiana to DC, where I was born, and they, my grandma's advice to my mom was, she was like, just look at his face and you see his smile, everything's going to turn out okay. And they can kind of reframe things a little bit for my mom in that moment, knowing this wasn't the end of the world. Like, yes, this was not expected, but they'd be able to get through it.
Yeah, your parents have their own story, that I'm sure is pretty amazing. Did you have any role models at all for someone in your condition as you were growing up?
No. It was also like dating Google and all of that, right? So you couldn't really find somebody. You couldn't jump online and find somebody with the same thing. So it was just a different time. Now it's been really cool. I actually I got the video posted on my Facebook page if people are curious to check it out. But like it was I got to meet a little boy who was his name is Francis, and he's had just turned 3 years old when we met, and didn't really talk a ton yet. I mean, he was talking some, but I see him looking at me differently, and he was born a quad amputee with limbs very similar to mine. And I could see that he was watching me differently, watching me, we're eating pizza together and like hanging out. And then, he was just, kind of quiet and shy at first, but was just watching me. And he asked, his dad, like he went outside, he's playing with this Thomas the train set, and asked his dad if I could come and play with him. And so I did, and we just played these trains together for like three or 4 hours.
That's cool.
And then we were running around together, chasing each other, and he was doing handstand push-ups with me, and it was amazing. So it was really fun to get
to
do that, knowing also too, my parents didn't really have anybody to talk to there.
So Kyle, there's a lot of people, I'm included, right, where we want to start something, do something, accomplish something, whatever it is. And we hit these points of, it's too hard. Or we think there's a frustration level where you hit, whatever it is. And there's a story I read where, and if you could repeat it, if you could tell the audience, where you were, the first time you dressed yourself or had to, and it took, could you tell us about that? It took a long time, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I think of that anytime I think of something hard to do, I'm like, are you kidding me? This, this is not hard compared to speed. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's really cool. So basically what happened was, as I mentioned, my parents encouraged me to go and figure out how to do most things on my own. And then, there were certain things though that my mom would just help with that were just easier to help with. And so getting dressed was one of those things. And she'd help me get dressed before school and all that. And it came time where I was maybe 15 years old. Joey, who I mentioned, my best friend and business partner, he had just gotten his learner's permit. So it was going to be him and his mom in the car coming to pick me up and take me to a movie. I'm sitting at home in sweatpants, and I called my mom to see if she could come home and pick me up before Joey came by to pick me up for this movie, see if my mom could come home and help me rest. And she was watching my sisters play softball. She said, "Hey, I'm sorry, I can't leave. You're gonna have to figure this out." And I was a little upset at first. Definitely, I had to go through that grief cycle pretty quick and move from just sadness and anger and frustration
you didn't have time
to yeah, exactly. So now it's a truncated clock that I've got to deal with, and then basically went and found a paper clip and reshaped it to form a fishing hook and used that to pull my socks on for the first time. But I was sweating all over the stupid thing, just drenched, just trying to battle to pull the sock on. And each sock took the first one took 30 plus minutes. Maybe the second sock was 50.
Putting on one sock the first time, 30 minutes. Wow.
So both socks together, 45 minutes. So it was, roughly cut my learning curve in half on 2 iterations of putting the sock on.
And then you had to become a product manager, figure out, hey, what device is going to help me put a sock on?
Right. So that was where I just went and found this paperclip in this drawer and reshaped it in my mouth to form a fishing hook and used that to pull the sock on. But now I don't use the paperclip anymore. So things are relatively normal, but that learning curve, the experience curve, as it were, is really kind of like a big part of my life and the different
that's amazing.
Lessons I've
that's unbelievable. Did you, I should say, did you, as you grew up, did you suffer from physical comparisons when you saw that you were different than everybody else?
I would say that yes. And there was always a period of time where, and I noticed this a lot, especially with kids with disabilities. I mean, kids in general, like, struggle with like transitions, right? And I mean, when I say kids, I mean, actually like human beings, we struggle with like transitional periods. And, it could be a new job, a new city or whatever. It could be, maybe a death of a loved one, and then you have to transition in a new life without that. That's it could be a lot of different transitional moments in our lives. I think as human beings, we sort of struggle with. And, when you have a physical disability, I think it just exacerbates that much more. So I remember moments of, moving, for instance, or going to kindergarten from a preschool that was sort of a preschool with kids with disabilities and then typical kids. But like, you've got like the kindergarten is like, like it was a totally typical classroom. So that was a big transition. And then we moved 5th grade, we moved from Indiana to Georgia. And that was a really hard adjustment. But also, going middle school to high school to college to then getting to travel around the world as a speaker. Each time the transition sort of like, grew, but there was those transitory elements that then became, they were difficult to deal with in their own nature, at the time. So that's, in hindsight, each one of those moments, I think then I would sort of like come up and like some of those comparative elements would be present. But I'm glad that was really able to just stick it out long enough in each one to now get to, travel around the world and really feel at home in the world. And if somebody, looks or stares or is, curious or whatever in the spectrum, I mean, sometimes even, hateful or ignorant, then it's like, I can kind of just go and see that that's their map of the world. It doesn't necessarily have to be mine, to take that on as my own. Did you have that
Mental model then? I mean, how did you cope with it then? I mean, was this your parents again, or are you, you know what I'm saying? So you each went through these transitions, and there were times when you did do some self-comparisons physically. Did you have something that you would always say to yourself? Was there, how did you kind of hang in there through those periods without despairing? Or did you despair, and was it just you just hung in there? It was just something that you pushed through till, the despair left or the comparisons left and you picked up your life. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say it's both. I'd say it's both the like environment and the fact that I did have an environment that was like pulling for me. And I think that's critical, right? Yeah. A lot of times the bigger challenges that someone face do come from the family environment and the fact that like, not all people are equipped equally to be parents. And, sometimes parents do make some terrible mistakes, or other relatives or other things of that nature. However, that didn't absolve things completely, but my mom was very much, sort of a mind over matter type person and would always sort of preach that. And she was just generally, she was awesome. I mean, in so many regards, I look back, like she had this sort of mental toughness about her, even though she was, sweet and wanted to coddle. In certain cases, she would say things like, if we're thirsty on a road trip, she'd say, swallow your spit. If we're like fighting with each other in the yard, she'd say like, okay, don't come and show me a cut unless there's a bone exposed. It was, she told me one time in wrestling, it was like, if you put the guy in enough pain with you on the wrestling mat, then he'll find a way off the mat. So,
wow.
There was definitely a toughness to mom, but, the worst of the transitional periods was when we moved from Fort Wayne, Indiana down to Atlanta, Georgia. And it was just a rough time. It was, cross, multi-state move and away from the entire world that I knew and into this new foreign world where now all of a sudden people looked at me very differently. And it was before I was playing sports. I was a huge sports fan, but just wondered, what the rest of my life was going to look like. I was at that point 10 years old and self-aware enough to know that things were not going to be a normal, typical existence for me. And, at that point I was ready to give up on my life. I mean, it was, we were living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with like mom, dad, 4 kids and a dog. And then, we're waiting for a house to be built in Georgia. And, in this cramped apartment, like going through those things, I just remember like that to be like a really just darker period in my life. And, I'm very fortunate and lucky the fact that like I didn't make a more permanent decision to end my life at that point, but I didn't have any hope to go on. I really struggled with that. And incidentally, that ended up being the best move that ever happened. It was less than a year after that, I brought a flyer home from school and told my mom that I wanted to play football, and met the most amazing football coach, Tom Shy, who went to bat for me when there was no physical evidence for the fact that I'd be able to go and play football, and, pushed it through a 7-member board where 3 people voted for me, 3 people voted against me to be able to play. And it came down to the last vote. And that gave me the chance to go out there and do it. And even other coaches would go and look at me more sympathetically. And my coach, I remember one time pulled me out of the warm up and brought me over and said, look, like, I dare you to test Kyle. And my wrestling coach, Cliff Ramos, the same. He'd tuck his arms into his sleeves to go and roll around from my perspective. And it ended up, the friends that I made, the changes that happened were the best possible thing that could have happened. But at the time I couldn't have seen it.
That is a great lesson, Kyle, right? There's so many people going through some shit right now, listening, and it may be one of their darkest times. But I always say, life is kind of like a book. It depends on what chapter you're on, right? You may be in the middle of the book. There's a lot of book to come. There's a lot of chapters to come, and they may be fantastic, but you've got to turn the page, right? And I mean, that's a perfect example. By the way, thanks for sharing this, Kyle, because I think I thought, does this guy, before I talked to you, Kyle, I thought, this guy, I don't think he ever gets discouraged. Does this guy ever get discouraged? I mean, look what he's climbing mountains. He's wrestling, I was waiting for a video, you wrestling Bigfoot or something, he took down a bear. He just, he went underwater, he went scuba diving and brought up a shark or something. It's like you're Superman in some of these areas. And so, and Kyle, I'm sure if I'm thinking it, a lot of other people think it too, right? So in other words, a lot of people, I would think they'd see your story, and I think the default is inspired. Like, oh, geez, I'm a wuss. I need to get up. I need to go do things. If this guy can do it, surely I can do it. But then I think there's another reaction where there's cognitive dissonance. Like you've done these great accomplishments with such physical limitations. They can't identify with it. And so they think, to get rid of the cognitive dissonance, they just say, forget, I'm not going to challenge myself. I can't do that. Does that make sense?
It does, more than you know. I mean, it's one of the, I'm like cognitive when I give a speech is that, sometimes I can tell the level of like realness or relatability that I presented with. Yeah. And not every speech is the same, right? Like not even every speaker is equal to himself on a different day. So it's, some days I'll be more open and authentic about my current, like challenges that are, numerous, but people might not see on the outside. But it's, one of the worst things I could hear is after a speech is like, wow, like you're so inspiring. And I'm just like depressed. I'm just this lazy piece of crap, blah, 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 whatever. And I know if I've done that, then I am solely responsible for them hearing that. And they didn't hear the fact too, that, all of the doubts and the fears and the frustrations and the fact that, those are still currently there. And it's to a lesser degree about the disability now necessarily, but a lot more about, other things and kind of fears of like, stepping outside of my comfort zone in my business and all that. And like, what if I do this? What if I do that? What if I screw it up? What if I'm not good enough? What if I
the same that everybody has?
It's 50 views, right? Like what if I fall on my face? Like what if I look like an idiot? Mm-hmm. All those things still are there. And I think now one thing that helps me is knowing that it's never going to go away. I think that in the past, I used to like wait to think at some point I'll be prepared to start. And now I think the difference is I know that no matter what I'm going through, one thing that will always invariably help is just to, as you sort of said, to move the page, to take action in some regard around the whatever I have to go and do with it. And things are not going to just like resolve themselves on their own unless I go and actually like take responsibility and go and do something about it. And I know that no matter what the thing is that I go and do right away, I'm probably going to suck at it for a long time before I figure it out, right? Not dissimilar from the story of the sock, right? It's that first sock taking 30 minutes, then the second one took 15, and now it takes 10 seconds.
And that's the story of mastery overall, right? People, you start at a very low level, and it's just a matter of persisting and doing, which your whole life is writ large with that kind of accomplishment. Do you use physical challenges? Like you thrive on, it seems, physical things, climbing mountains, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, martial arts. Do you find some kind of connection of your physical challenges help you mentally where, I'm trying to say, is there a bleed effect where you say, if I can, doing this is going to bring me further along in my emotional or mental capacity. I'm not saying this right, Kyle, but there's some kind of bleed over into other areas of life if you accomplish something physically.
You're touching on a pretty big, important point to my life and kind of personal journey. And yeah, it's a lot more than just the physical, right? Like the physical is sort of an access to something much bigger. And, at face value, there's a lot of like more physical accomplishments, but people now are, when they ask like, okay, what's the next mountain you're going to go and climb? It used to be like, when are you going to fight in MMA or jiu-jitsu again? When's the next like big wrestling tournament or weightlifting tournament? Like when's the next mountain? Like is sort of the current question that I'll get is that's the mountaineering has kind of been more of the recent thing. But I tell people photography and videography, that's my current mountain, because it's sort of like the non-linear where I want to jump into things that it's more about the learning.
Yes.
And what it can take me, where it can take me and where I can go with it, than it is about the event itself. And like the physical events, though, were sort of my access to learn about myself. And that led to like a deep dive into wanting to learn psychology and studying psychologists like Martin Seligman or Albert Bandura, Dr. Urban Yalom. And
I love Seligman. Yeah. Some good stuff.
Linguistic programming and, things like that. Philosophy, like Sartrean philosophy, Nietzsche and, and the Stoics
but you got there from the physical challenges. They bled into these other areas. Like I've read where people have lost weight, like great amounts of, a lot of weight. Let's say they're super obese and they've lost like 100 pounds. All of a sudden their whole life changed, not just from the weight, but now they've got a new job. Now they're learning a new career. They went back to school. There was some connection.
Yeah. Dating. I mean, it's like the whole, I think, if you look at like the universe at every single level, whether it's the bigger, planetary systems, the galaxies, the universe as a whole, versus like even the tiniest like subatomic levels at like the Planck scale, then it's, where you can see like the individual like atoms, right? So
connections. Yeah.
Everything is in motion though. Everything is a vibration. Everything is constantly moving, and it's sort of, it's directional in nature. Right. And I think that our lives very much work the same way. I think that like, we're sort of in that state of like growth or decay. We're sort of constantly oscillating between the two, and maybe some areas of our life are are going well and others are not. Maybe things are going better in general, or things are going, not so great in general. It's just, we kind of forget. It's less, I think, as we become more personally responsible for the direction of our lives, it's less circumstantial. It's less of like what's going on in the environment around me, and more of like, where is my own inner locus of control to then be able to go and influence which direction I'm actually going.
Wow, that's you're motivating me just sitting here listening to you. That's it's just amazing what you're doing. So I want to kind of wrap this up, but let me just piece some of this together and tell me what you think. But if we could like talk to people and say, help them through, encourage them or help them through whatever they're kind of going through. I was thinking as we were talking, as I was listening to you, that, there were some absolute physical limitations or perceived limitations that you broke through, right? And somebody may not have these physical limitations, or they might, but there may be mental or there may be circumstantial limitations that are more perceived than real, unless they try, unless they attempt, because you've done so many things where there was a perceived limitation, like there's no way you could do this, but you tested them. Your life seems to be, let me test this. Let me test my limitations. Well, let me see if I can do it. I don't know. You had this kind of experimental attitude, which I think we can all benefit from, to say, well, I'm not going to accept that as face value that I can't do this. I'm going to try. Does that make sense? Yeah.
There's three words that you said that are three of the most critical words in my life of any area is I don't know. And, not knowing is actually like a much more powerful stance, I think, than people realize. Not knowing is where the source of truth comes from, is the discovery of truth, or a deeper truth. Because if we're fixed to what we know, then we cannot grow, right? If we know that we can or cannot do something, I would actually, it sounds like the anti-motivational speaker, but I would want to go and inject a little bit of doubt into somebody. I used to say anything is possible, but I don't really believe that. I believe the spirit of it, but I believe that like a better way to state that is to like, know your limits, but never stop trying to break them. And that only happens by actually like, ironically, not knowing your limits. Because if you don't know your limits, then you test, and then you retest, and you test, and you retest, and you find out, okay, this is where I'm at right now. Now I kind of have an idea of where those limits are, and I can set a course to go and to go and break those. I mean, it's when I went to go and have the plan to go and climb Mount Kilimanjaro or Mount Aconcagua, it was like, Kilimanjaro in particular, because that was like the first big mountain we decided to go and do. I was climbing with bath towels duct taped to my arms and my feet, basically. And it was, like if I'd decided to go and use those in Kilimanjaro, I'd probably still be a third of the way up right now, like 5 years later. So not knowing though was really the source of like, okay, now I can go and figure this out. What is the actual truth? It's kind of, I guess the only time I like really struggle is when, I go and meet people that are like so resolute and in their knowing that they kind of miss the boat on that gray area of, like nature versus nurture. It's like, well, there's a lot of like both going on, right? Like I'm not ever, probably not, no matter what, like if LeBron James or Michael Jordan in his prime were trying to beat me in a basketball game, I'm probably never going to go and beat them in a basketball game. So nature was a pretty significant element there. But the nurture side of things, of like, there's a lot of other things I could go and do to go and cultivate myself to be physically adept at things, maybe not basketball in that capacity, right? There are fixed circumstances, and there are ones that like we sort of think are fixed, but then we can come up with really convincing like reasons and rationales as to like why those things should impact us.
We don't know our limits.
Yeah.
You probably know more than most because you're testing them, but a lot of people but
the more that you know, that you don't know, right?
Well, I know, but that's an interesting, I've never thought of it that way. We don't know our limits.
Right.
You might, well, there's we know a lot of our limits, right? Yeah. I'm not going to, I know I can't dunk a basketball. There's some things I know, right? But there are a lot of limitations that we're not 100% sure that we can't overcome, right? I'm saying this wrong, but you know what I mean?
No. I
love that. I wrote down, I don't know. I love that. I mean, in a positive sense. I don't know.
Embracing that not knowing, right? So if you tell me like, okay, I've got a business plan that I'm going to go and start this business, and like, here's the thing, and it's going to go and make this amount of money and whatever else, and you're super confident that you're going to go and do it, it's like, awesome. No business plan has ever unfolded exactly as someone thought it would.
And that's okay.
And that's okay, right? So, but still plenty of businesses start and succeed.
Yeah.
Find out, right? So I'd put a little bit of doubt in you that it's going to go exactly the way that you thought there. But at the same time, if you came to me and you're like, I can't start a business, don't have the funds, don't have the resources, don't have the time, don't have the experience, blah, blah, blah. Do you want to go and put a little bit of doubt into you as to why that's not necessarily true either?
So this has been fantastic, and I kind of want to wrap this up. But before I do, I'm asking everybody this: what tool, gadget, product has really helped you do all that you do physically?
We could probably do a
whole thing on it, right?
A whole thing on this, but I would say I would start with the 3 tools in you of your heart, your mind, and your guts, and all things that, I would say that feed and grow that. And to me, that's a sense of purpose. It's a sense of learning new things. It's experiencing things with people that I want to experience them with. And it's also, like, it's giving back. It's that double bottom line. It's, one of my mentors taught me the idea of like purpose and profitability. So it's a very important element. And then, so like in your heart, why are you here? In your head, like, what do you actually think? And in your guts, like, how are you going to handle it when you do get knocked down, you get kicked, dirt in your face, and you've got to go and deal with it. 95% of the time when I'm climbing a mountain, it sucks. I'm staring at the dirt and the rocks, right? But it's the 5% that doesn't suck that is that much more worth it. And sometimes that just takes those like deeper guts. And I mean that physically and literally. It's like physically, like even like the health of, of your heart, your mind, and your guts, like the strength of that, but also like the sort of figurative guts of like, how deep are you willing to go to be able to push through to get to where you say that you want to go, instead of just, it's one of the quotes I think about a lot was Henry David Thoreau talked about like, the best life is when we're in our dreams awake. And, how can we go and create that life for ourselves instead of getting so caught up in all the stuff? Anytime that I'm really stuck, there's a thought exercise that I've been doing recently. And for some reason it helps me a lot. But I ask myself, like, can I prove that the universe is older than 5 minutes? And the answer is no. You can't prove that the universe isn't 5 minutes old, that you weren't just transported into your current circumstance and your state right now, and then you got to go and deal with whatever. So sometimes, radically.
Wow, that's deep, Kyle. That's deep, man.
Took my psychedelic tea before this interview. I'm kidding.
Mushroom tea.
So, but like seriously, I go and like look at my life right now, and I'm like, what if, like, if I'm having a really hard time, I'm like, what if I just got planted here in this guy Kyle's body and circumstance, and like the current dealings that he's going on with, or the business deals, the relationship, happenings, the family, stuff. Like, now what do I do? And it gives me a fresh perspective to not get hung up on
the past or
all the other past or the other things that are going on. It's just like, okay, I'm here. Now what?
That's an interesting thought experiment. I like that. I didn't know where you were going there at first, but now I like it. So that's what I said, man. We need a whole other. Yeah. Do you meditate, Kyle? Do you meditate? Or have any practice like that
regularly,
or is sports that you're?
I love it. It's one of those things where it's one of those like when I should on myself when I I should meditate more, but my meditation, I find, is in, the day-to-day opportunities to just sort of like be present and focused there. It's like
that's meditation,
more like waking meditation. Yeah. Jiu-jitsu, when somebody's trying to choke you
I mean, you got to be mindful, right? Some guy's clamping down, putting a triangle on. You're very in the moment, right?
Or girl too. That's how I fell in love with it in the first place, actually. So Chris Howder, our mutual friend, gave me my blue belt. But it was like, I remember my first day in jiu-jitsu, and this girl I outweighed by 20 pounds latches her legs around my neck and my arm and triangles me. And it was like, I felt helpless. And then I saw her do it to a 220 pound guy the next day. And I thought, man, whatever she knows about human physiology and anatomy and movement, I have to understand. So
did you tap out a brown belt? I just saw you I saw a video of you. It was a girl. She was a brown belt.
Yeah. I've gotten a few black belts as well. I mean, it was like, definitely, we at our school, Atos, like we have black belts that frequently come in that, get tapped out by our blue belts. And, not that it's a bad at all. I mean, we'll have our own different stages of it. Like, I'd rather be the blue belt or purple belt that's frequently tapping the black belt instead of the other way around.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Kyle, this has been absolutely fantastic. Your story is inspirational, but just talking to you, you're incredibly down to earth. And do you do a lot of work with like vet groups, or tell us about that? Because part of what I thought was how different it must be being born that way, and then the struggle of someone who had something to compare to in the past. Yep. They had arms and legs, and now they don't. Yep. And you know what I'm saying? It's like you grew up and as a baby through that, and this is life, and acceptance was kind of built into the deal. But tell us about your work with vets, and that. Have you dealt with those type of folks?
It's been, one of the biggest honors of my life. My dad was military. I tried really hard to go in myself. I told him I'd do anything, I told me I could be a chaplain. I was like, does he get a gun? That's all I care about. Mm-hmm. But, it was, I was born at Walter Reed Army Hospital. So now it's a hospital where so many of our service members come back home to do their rehabilitation after they go through an injury. And it's been an amazing experience. By far, some of the biggest honors of my life have been, in opportunities to go and, to your point, it is so different being born a quad amputee versus, becoming a single or double or triple, quadruple amputee due to combat or things of that nature. But it's still, I want to instill in them the fact that you're still capable of living, an awesome life, not just a good life or like a regular life, but like a great life. And one of my really good friend, Travis Mills, is perfect example of that. Just like one of the most amazing human beings you'll ever meet in the planet, that was a, big dude, Army Ranger, put his book bag down in an IED and lost all four. Oh. But like one of the funniest human beings I've ever met, and just really all around amazing guy, and just announced on the Ellen show a couple days ago that he's going to have his second baby boy. And, just he's doing a lot to help people and help himself. And I think that's what, I get inspired by that. I get inspired by people that are not going to, bend to just like every little circumstance that happens, even if it is a big one.
How do you help these guys? Is it pretty much just you modeling a life the way you're living it, or are you counsel these guys? Is it all of the above?
Sometimes, there's been a little bit more structured elements than others. I've gotten to, CrossFit has been an amazing organization to, through CrossFit, I've gotten to go and, I used to be one of the occasional staff members where we would certify, veterans in CrossFit. So they had an opportunity there for another source of income. Just different capacities. The Honor Foundation is a special warfare training transition program that I work very closely with there. They just made I love the people there, the messaging they give veterans, over 120 hours of executive MBA coaching, but they're not necessarily always wounded veterans. Sometimes, occasionally they are, but it's a lot of, just helping them, veterans in general, sort of transition into like determining what that next step is. And then other times it's just going into the hospital rooms, and sometimes like recently after injury, there have been 5 quadruple amputees that have kind of survived the wars, and I've gotten to meet 4 out of 5 of them. And it's been an amazing time to just get, I want to be very, very sensitive in those moments when I go into a hospital room and get to spend that time there, because in terms of like bouncing back, I mean, there is a really fragile place sometimes that people can be in those moments. Right. And, it's not time for the harder core excuses, rah message, but now it's like, like just kind of hang in there. Right. And then you have no idea what's capable, what's going to happen on the other side. That to me it's been an unbelievable honor to get to serve in that way. It's different than it would have been serving with a gun, but it's, to me, I've been able to find some purpose in it. But anybody that's listening to this that thinks that they can't make a difference in other people's lives too, I'll just go and say that, like, that's total bullshit. Like you can do the same thing too. And sometimes even if you are struggling, then the best thing that you could do is go out and take eyes off of yourself and your own problems, but be able to go and just make a difference in somebody else's life. That's
a fantastic message, Kyle. What's next for you? Are you going to Mars? What's happening? What are you doing? What?
I got some stuff planned for, this summer will be fun. The photography, videography is a big part of it, but a big part of that is because I'm just going to be spending a lot of time traveling, going to Spain, Greece, coming up, and then going this summer will be in Tokyo, Croatia, Israel. So, some pretty terrible places, but.
Is this speaking, or you're doing kind of your extreme sports and what have you?
Actually, it's neither. A lot of it is frankly just to go. The Greece thing is going to be a fairly extreme event. I'm going with about 30 SEALs to march from Sparta to Thermopylae to retrace the steps of King Leonidas in the 300.
Wow.
But the rest of it will be relatively, like relaxing, minus like the video and video editing, which I realize is, kind of takes a little bit, but
yeah. So where do they find you online, Kyle? Is it just your website, or? Yeah,
hopefully more that's super easy for people to do that. It's been kind of my excuse. One of the excuses I made is definitely in the digital marketing world, but it's something I've been more passionate about lately. So yeah, either like Facebook and Instagram are the 2 platforms I'm most active on, and then through my website as well. And that those, are generally, and I hopefully will have more kind of stuff coming out and like YouTube and things of that nature.
Very cool. So one last thing I just wanted to. You have like this fantastic sense of humor. Is this a true story where your coach said that you, or did you like pretend you were in a shark attack or something? Somebody left you by the road. Is that a true story?
I've done some pretty terrible pranks before. So
tell us real quick.
Yeah. That one was at a camp down in Florida, and I ended up. We procured a giant can of tomato sauce from the kitchen, and a friend dressed as a lifeguard proceeded to dump them, like the can, all over my arms and my feet, and friends were yelling "shark attack." And I realized then I could actually do a really convincing spat on my back, mimicking a shark attack victim. So it was a pretty convincing scene. And one girl who was crying called 911, and that's when I said, "All right, I'll see you guys later."
That's horrible, Kyle. That's horrible.
Terrible.
Terrible.
Don't try that at home, kids.
Listen, man, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's fun to talk about some different things.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate it. Kyle Maynard, thanks a lot, man. So that's all the time we have today. A big shout out, thank you to Sam Williams, my audio editor, and the music you're hearing is Michael Petrovich, and you could find him on iTunes or at MikePetrovichmusic.com. I'm Larry Weeks, and we will talk again soon.